This is pretty interesting. I mean, here's Linda McMahon and her lovely little flyer. And in the flyer, she's talking to two women.
Yeah.
And she's got her hand on a ring. You know, the way that guys would have their hand on their ring if they were going to take it off for one of the women they're talking to. Well, she looks like she's ready to take off that ring for one of those two women, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
Oh. Welcome to Progressive Soup. I'm sorry. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. Tonight I have a great guest, Kevin Gallagher. Kevin has been doing his own show for almost 14 years now on Comcast, and I could only hope to be half the producer and half as good a show as Kevin is doing. He's fantastic. Kevin's going to talk about moments in his 14 years of his show that stand out in his mind. And you can imagine in 14 years of taping, there are a lot of great moments. I'm not going to ask you to give us the top one first, but give us one that you remember being as good, and tell us about it.
Well, first of all, I'm Kevin Gallagher. A lot of people, I guess, know me from watching 23. And you're looking for shows that I remember. I know whenever I talk to Rich Merritt, who's a cameraman for a lot of shows here and has been a cameraman for me for years, he always brings up the show I did with Chris Cox, who used to run a pet store in the Stony Hill area of Bethel, who would bring on all these different animals so I could have these animal shows. And he brought in a scorpion and a spider, a big tarantula. Now, I like animals and all that, but I don't like spiders, and I like scorpions even less.
I don't think they're on anybody's list of favorite pets.
No, and I was sitting where you are, and he was sitting where I am, and he had the tarantula was really mellow, just sitting there. It's pretty harmless. He had the scorpion underneath like a plastic like petri dish thing, and it was right there, and it had the tails all like this, ready to go.
Yeah.
Well, he released it, and he wanted to he was going to show it, and it ran right down the table like this, and you could see on the camera too where it came right down the tablecloth, fell on the floor, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not moving. The thing ran right over both of my feet. I could feel it scuttle right across both of my feet. And he came over here and he scooped it up by the tail and put it.
I guess that's what you're supposed to do, isn't it?
I guess
I'm not
you did the right thing,
you know. I guess you did the right thing, because I guess when something is like that, a snake or whatever, the thing to do is don't move.
Yeah.
So you did the right thing. Now, did you do the right thing out of knowledge or out of fear?
I think a little of both, because I didn't want it to think I was like an animate object. I just wanted it to think I was part of the chair. And it's an emperor scorpion. They're pretty harmless. They look nasty, and the funny thing with a scorpion, the bigger they are, the less harmful they are. The smaller it is, the more deadly it is.
Now, your pants legs, were they wide pants legs? Were they wide enough for a scorpion to find its way up
probably,
your leg?
Yeah, probably.
Oh,
I don't want to think about it too much, because it would probably give me nightmares, But I'm going to get Chris back on again. I mean, I've had him. He brought in, like, snakes don't bother me at all. He brought in a big albino boa constrictor. Actually, it was a Burmese python. The thing was huge, like this around. It was great. And but my thing, is, I started doing the show as a means of being able to give something back to the community, because I'm not like some wealthy billionaire like Bill Gates or fill in the blank, but this is something that I can do to give something back. And what I try to do is try to mix it up. What I figured out really quickly is that if I could imagine it in my mind, I could try to get it on a TV screen.
So you try to, so you conceive it first.
Yeah.
And then you put it into a more realistic setting.
Yeah.
Oh.
And what I do is, if I'm looking through a paper or something like that, I ask myself, would I want to, watch this for 30 minutes? That's the litmus test. Could I do something with this?
Would you find it interesting? And that's a pretty good litmus test. I mean, you've got an average man's finer sensibilities.
Yeah.
And you look at, as you say, you look at it and you figure out whether you would like it, because you know yourself well enough, and you know human nature well enough to know that if you like it, probably everybody would find at least a little bit interesting.
And the other part of that is I didn't want to get pigeon-toed, so that if somebody was coming home from a hard day at work, and my show's on Friday nights.
What do you mean by pigeon-toed? Well, you'll explain it as you explain.
Pigeon-toed would be where the guy comes home from work late at, he's worked all day, and a lot of people I find watch Channel 23 on Friday nights when my show's on. And they say, okay, let's see what's going on in the area, and they put it on. I don't want people to think, oh, God, Kevin Gallagher is going to be, ranting about fill in the blank. So that's what I mean by pigeon-toed. I didn't want to be defined as one element or one subject. I wanted to be able to branch out and cover as many different subjects, some sports, animals. I've had a lot of bands on only because I've always, listened to a lot of bands, a lot of music, different kinds of music. And even though this studio is not set up to do music, this is set up to do what we're doing right now, which is the spoken word. We
found that out with we've had good luck with the acoustic instruments.
Yeah.
But
electric.
But when we had a hip hop group on last week, which hasn't aired yet, but it'll be up on YouTube, thanks to Kevin. We found that it's very difficult to go into that, as you say, that amplified element of music.
Well, it's not a slight against Comcast. It's just that this studio that we're in right now is really set up to do talk shows. It's not set up to record music, which is a whole different animal. And like a talk show level for audio is here, and you're talking about way up here. The dynamics, everything is different. I mean, a lot of times I'm using a lapel mic, like what I have on my shirt and you have on your jacket. So the thing is it's just not designed to do that. So I've learned different little tricks that I'm not going to tell all on the air, but ways of getting around that. So
you can tell them. I'm listening.
There's little tricks I've done. And that is if a band, the easiest is if a band has recordings of their music. I can do the Britney Spears thing. I can have them lip sync it, and I can run the music directly out of their amplifiers if they have it hooked up to a CD player, straight out into the control room where they can control the audio because you're playing a CD and then they're faking lip syncing the music. Now it sounds good, it looks good, and they have something that they are proud to have go out on the air.
We had when we did that last week with some young men that are hip hoppers. I think it's worked. I think Candy actually helped our director Jeff Thomas, who's very good. She gave him a little lesson in how to do that, and I think that's how they did it with the turntables.
It's hard,
but
it's really hard.
The vocals were on the handheld microphones with a long cord. It came out all right.
But it's a very difficult show to do. Plus, it's kind of like the old adage of if you're an audiophile and you buy like a really nice stereo, you buy the speakers first. And why? Because that's where the sound is actually coming out of. And if you look at the equivalent here, that would be your cameras. So Rich Merritt, and there's Bionic John. I call him Bionic John, but that's John Newmuller. Those are the best camera people that we have here that volunteer. They've been coming here for years, and they're really, really good. So that's where it starts, with something like that, where you're going to be creative and you're going to get the creative juices rolling. I know, and I don't want to put words in John's mouth, but he's told me over the years, you have a band on, I'll be there, because it's more of a challenge. It's not just focusing on you and me. There's stuff going on. There's a whole band, there's drums, there's guitars, bass, there's people singing, there's lip syncing. And you have all those elements going on, so you can be a lot more creative, and it's hard to do.
It makes the show
it look good.
A lot more three-dimensional. Visually three-dimensional. It seems like you probably have to focus in, focus out, focus in, focus out a lot more. Which I can imagine.
Blending and making these shots where one shot's over the other and layering the shots. And if you have a good director, that's where that comes in. So if you can, and you got to, then you also got to get a good audio person to handle the challenges of what the audio presents. Totally different animal than doing a show where you're sitting down with, say, a politician or some kind of person that's an activist, where we're talking like right now. Much easier show to do.
That's the easiest kind of show.
Kids, animals. I do traditionally a Christmas show every year with Santa Claus and kids, and you got to get the close-ups on the children, and all these things have to be thought out ahead of time.
You didn't mention when you had the scorpion story. What happened to the tarantula when the scorpion was scurrying around?
Oh, the tarantula was like over here somewhere. He scooped them up. It's a rose tarantula. They're pretty docile. They're pretty tame. Chris told me he had it for like 6-7 years at that point. Never bit him, nothing. He would just kind of scoop it up on his. Yeah. And I hate spiders. I see spiders. I take a shoe and I'm like, you know.
I'm not exactly arachnophobic, but I really am not real keen on spiders either. Or tarantulas scare me too.
You know. So, but there was that. But also, I mean, I've had the late Joe Beck on, and he was a guitarist. He lived in Weston. And he played with people like Miles Davis and some really big... He was Miles Davis's first guitarist, as a matter of fact. Oh. And he died a year or two ago, and I had him on, and he didn't know... And to his credit, he didn't know who I was. And I went over to a local place where he was playing over in New York, kind of tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, you know, Joe, I've been listening to your music for years. I got some of your albums. Really appreciate your playing. And he was unique because he actually had this guitar that he designed with a bass string, so he could actually play a bass line and pick with his fingers the guitar work at the same time. Nobody's done that.
That is very... I play guitar kind of.
Him and Allie Ryerson.
The audience knows a little bit about, but
yeah. Mean, the guy was talented.
He's doing the bass line and...
doing bass lines with his thumb, and he's picking, like a Wes Montgomery almost, just picking and playing, and he was here. This is the guy that played with Miles Davis, and he was on my show, and I was blown away because I was naive enough to just go up and ask him.
That's like sending your mind and your fingers off in two different directions to do. It's like you're playing two instruments at the same time, almost.
Yeah.
But that's pretty.
And he was here, Allie Ryerson, who's a pretty well-known flutist. She's played all over the world with orchestras, and she was here, and we taped basically 6 music videos that we then worked into the program, and you can see those folks up on YouTube. They're up on YouTube, where I went and edited out the actual performances.
Now, did you give Jeff your YouTube information or no?
No, I should have, but
you can mention it 3-4 times during the show.
Time Out Productions. If you go to YouTube and you put in either my name or you put in Time Out Productions, you're going to find 600+ videos. So there's a lot of shows there going back over the 13 years, including the first one I ever did, interviews with politicians like Joe Lieberman, Jody Rell, there's a Charlotte Iserby, Paul Craig Roberts, who was known as the father of Reaganomics, and I've had him on several times.
That's supply side economics.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I've had him, you know, from all over the political spectrum. I've had politicians. I've had Joe Beck, let's see, Wes Anderson, who played for years with Wynton Marsalis. Tons of local bands, which I really enjoy. Jazz, country, Irish music, rock and roll, and just the whole spectrum, because I don't want people to know what they're going to see from week to week. So
that's got to be the best kind. Well, you're doing local television for a local audience, and I would think that it makes sense that you would be best served by having local people on, people that maybe the audience doesn't even know is that as skilled at whatever they do as they are, and just to get a flavor for local folks. Yeah. So we can all say, oh my God,
Olympic athletes on.
Yeah.
You know.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Olympic athletes. I even had a lady, Heidi. What's her name? Heidi. I'll remember it in a minute. But she actually was the only woman. She's been on Discovery Channel. She's been on. Discovery Channel. And that's up on YouTube, and she was the only woman to actually lead expeditions to K2 and Mount Everest. And she was from Richfield. I mean, it's like...
I remember that story in the paper.
And that's how I found her. I read the paper, and, oh, well, that would make a really interesting show. So she had footage of her climbing K2 and Everest, and it was really, really... Heidi Howkins. And really, really... really interesting show. So I try to do something that's a little different so that when you turn on Access, unfortunately, the way I look at Access is kind of like when you walk into a well-known fast food establishment, pick one. Well, they use the stainless steel everywhere, so you can see if the place is dirty. They're generally pretty clean, but you don't expect a 5-star meal when you go in there. You're in there quick and dirty. You get your burger and you're out.
Yeah.
There's a purpose. We're not dealing with $1 million studio here or whatever. It is what it is. It's access, and it's the local level. But it doesn't mean that it has to be boring. It doesn't mean that it has to be stale and rigid and whatever else. And that's what people, I think of when they say, oh, local TV, that's going to be boring, that's going to be this, it's going to be that. Well, I kind of sat there and said to myself, well, why does it necessarily have to be that? Why not try to do something different? You're not going to see bands. You're not going to see certain things. So let's try to go and do that. And a lot of it came about just because I didn't know any better, and I was able to do it and try to figure out how to make it work.
And while we're talking generically about the local station, I want to give a shout out to Dave King and Candy Roswell, who have both been here quite some years.
Yeah, long time.
And are absolutely marvelous at helping out. They do the classes, and I would encourage anybody that has an inkling of what they'd like to do for the local crowd, for the local audiences, for friends, neighbors, family, to come on down, take the course. You're only in the course for maybe about 15, 20 hours of your time to learn how to do everything, and you get a group of people together, and bingo, you're on television.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun, and I'll vouch for that. And for 14 years,
you've
had 14 years worth of fun. I've only had about 40 weeks or 45 weeks worth of fun so far.
Yeah. Well, you wind up, it's a learning process, and it's just, when I started the show, it took me about 6 months. And what I knew is that I wanted this. I wanted a round table, a round table format, and I've been a fan of Charlie Rose, for example, for a long time.
On PBS, yep.
Because I like the format, the black background, the round table, and it's just him and his guest, and he would always ask very good questions, I thought. Very probing, very good follow-ups, and there's a lot of times where he could interview somebody without really asking them a direct question. Try that sometime, folks. That's not easy to do. And so what was kind of crazy is I knew I wanted the round table, but it never dawned on me to do the black black background. So somebody I knew said, Kevin, you like Charlie Rose. I said, why don't you just do the black background? And well, at that time, Comcast didn't have these nice, nifty curtains that you can just move. I mean, if somebody moved it...
Tell our audience about that. That's a great story.
I would come in and tape, but I'd have to come in here an hour earlier, because what we would have to do, I came here with Mike Duff, and we'd get a ladder, and we'd have to hang black paper, and we'd tape it up on the walls. It would take us 45 minutes to an hour to set up, and then my guests would be arriving, and we'd be ready to go.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to take everything down, carefully roll everything up, and put it away. So now you don't have to do that. They did this wonderful upgrade a few years ago where there's a black background and a yellow one, or a beige one.
The beige one, yep.
And so on some shows you'll see a beige. I always use the black. I personally like it. I don't use on my show any of the plants.
Yep.
I want the bare look, very simple, I want the focus to
very
be entirely
in terms
on
of art. Yeah.
Yeah, very much on the guest, because it sounds crazy. My show is called Time Out with Kevin Gallagher, but the focus has never been on me. The focus I try to put entirely on whoever it is I'm interviewing and/or the subject matter.
That is very clear to anyone that's ever watched your show, that you do focus on your guest. And I've been on your show as your guest once, and interesting story there where you called me and asked me about being on because I ran for state representative, and I asked a couple of people, and I heard that and you can embellish on this afterwards, that Kevin's kind of right of center, but he does a pretty good show. Now, in talking to people about you, it's in the last year and a half since then, tell me what people on the right say about you and what people on the left say about you.
Well, let's see. When there was a Republican in the White House, I was a flaming leftist.
Yeah.
And now that there's a Democrat, I'm a flaming rightist. So And I'm neither. I'm a political atheist. I am a registered Republican, and that's only recently, and that's only so I could participate at a local level.
In primaries, particularly.
That's really the only reason. Otherwise, for the most part, when I look at either the Republican or Democratic parties at a national level, I see absolutely no difference, except the letters that make up Democrat and Republican are slightly different. But that's about the only difference that I can really see. I don't really see, personally, much of a difference. I really don't.
Is that based on this what we refer to nowadays as corporatists?
Yeah, in part, and globalists.
Globalists,
and that whole global corporate mentality, which I think is alien to our country, to the country, and to me and you and the people watching. If you're an American, that rugged individualism that made us American, it's being taken away, and I'm not real comfortable with that. I'm really not. Say what you will about John Wayne or whatever, but the individual is the enemy of big government or any government. In the sense that that's what terrifies governments.
I'm going to dwell on that because I'm not sure if I agree with you on that. I'm not sure if I agree with you on that. If you're going into Gandhi, I'm with you.
Martin Luther King are two of my heroes, I guess you could say. Risk takers, but they were individualists. They could think outside the box. They could think for themselves.
Yeah. You got me on Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Not on John Wayne.
John Wayne in the sense of the rugged individualism.
The persona.
And when you think of an American and you think of that persona, you think of John Wayne. But people that were individuals who could think for themselves, and you take somebody like Martin Luther King who could organize. That terrifies governments. That terrifies them. And people like that I like. Rebels I like because of that fact, and not just going with the status quo. Now, I've never really been someone that wants to be with the status quo. If I see the group of lemmings going this way, I'm going to go that way because I know down there is probably a cliff.
Yep, or the ocean is.
Or the ocean, probably a couple 100 feet down.
Now, I've had Billy Michael on my show and had a great show with him. You've had Billy Michael on your show.
Yes, sir.
And I lost my train of thought, so we're going to go on to stuff. We'll come back to
Billy Michael on your show, Billy Michael on my show.
Okay, tell us about your show with Billy Michael. Your shows with Billy Michael.
I've had Billy Michael on a couple of times, generally to cover like the local budget and stuff like that. And I'm really, I like covering issues, and if I'm at a local level, I want to cover the issue not from the way maybe that everybody else is looking at it, or the accepted paradigm.
Yeah.
Billy is going to give you a much different point of view, libertarian point of view, and I want to make sure that all points of view can kind of see the light of day, so that like that buffet table, a person can take from it what they want. I want to present, as many different sides as possible, and trying to keep myself out of the fray, so to speak. I want to be the person that can present this to somebody so that they can. Let me explain it to you this way. Maybe present something that's controversial without myself being controversial. Yeah. And that's an art form, and that's not easy to do.
Just laying a thought on the table and let people taste it as they will, to whatever degree they want to. See, now that's how I define liberal. Because, not left, not right, but liberal in the classic sense of being open-minded to alternative thinking. And many people who are on the left politically are not very liberal because they're stuck in certain notions and unwilling to reach out. Likewise, people on the right sometimes are very stuck in their notions and not willing to take a chance on a fresh idea. Right.
And I noticed one thing that a lot of people I don't think remember or know is I was co-founder of the Pro-Bethel Party. Now, a lot of people attribute the Pro-Bethel Party entirely to Bob Cernick, and he runs that party. Now, I haven't run that party for several years. But
how did your Pro-Bethel Party differ from how the Pro-Bethel Party is now? Is that okay to talk about?
Yeah, except, the point I was going to make is,
go ahead.
To go to your earlier point, is what I have found with third parties at a local level or state or national level is that that's the fertile ground where ideas spring from.
Yep.
And you'll see it at any level where later on the idea becomes very much gradually accepted, and then the major parties take them and run with them.
Is that 30 seconds or 3 minutes?
I think that was 3 minutes,
okay.
right? Yeah.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Now everybody knows we got 3 minutes.
Okay. Now that we have 3 minutes left in the show,
you understand what I'm getting at?
Exactly.
Because for the major parties, it's too much of a, quote, risk, where the risk isn't there for the, quote, minor party, so they can take the risk and introduce the new ideas, whether it's pro-Bethel, Green Party, Constitution, whoever, I don't care. They can get the idea out there where it can be accepted or rejected. Now, to connect that to Billy Michael,
yes.
One thing that I already knew, but he really reinforced for me, is that all political movements are usually done by a very small group of people. And then they move those ideas forward, and the masses will come out to vote on a referendum or vote in an election and approve or disapprove of what really, essentially, a very small core group of people have actually done.
Oh, yeah, in politics.
And that's the way it has always been and probably always will be, like it or not.
Yeah, in politics, 90% of the work is done by 10% of the people.
Yeah.
And that's human nature, I guess.
And 10% is probably a bit high.
Probably, yeah, probably a little bit high. It's probably 95% done by 5% of the people. And those of us that get deeply involved in doing things, no matter where you're coming from politically, I'm sure feel very frustrated. Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap up this show right now. We're going to come back for a second show because we're having a great time doing this, and we're going to talk a little further. This is Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. We have Kevin Gallagher. And thank you for the first show.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's come back and do another one in about 20 minutes.
Sure.